In this talk, I will introduce my composition Zeno, which I composed 3 years ago. The piece is for bass clarinet and electronic sounds synthesized interactively with a quantum computer. Here is how the system is set up. During a performance, a laptop client listens to the clarinet and extracts information from the sounds. This information is converted into parameters for quantum circuits and relayed to a quantum machine server for processing. The quantum machine then sends the results of the measurements back to the client. The client converts these results into musical responses, which are played through the loudspeakers. All this happens in real time during the performance. Let us watch a video with an excerpt of the performance. I composed this piece for a fantastic clarinet player, Sara Watts. Now, I will introduce you to the quantum circuits that I have implemented for this composition, and I will discuss the composition itself. I will show how I composed it and discuss some ideas behind its design. To cut it short, the quantum computer runs two systems which I refer to as QSynth and QSIC. The server runs two programs, a simple quantum hyperdice and a sequencer. And the client runs sound synthesizers and a MIDI instrument. QSynth uses the hyperdice and the synthesizers. It counts the number of notes played on the clarinet, and then it runs the quantum hyperdice circuit for the amount of notes that it counted. Then it selects one of two possible synthesizers to make a sound, and then it synthesizes the sounds. QSIC uses the quantum sequencer and the MIDI instrument. It extracts musical information from the sounds played by the clarinet. Then it builds transition matrices, and then it runs quantum circuits which represent those matrices and generates the musical sequence which is played in response to the clarinet. The circuit for the hyperdice used in QSynth is very simple, as you can see here. Basically, it generates an 8-bit long code. There is another version of this circuit where I use rotation gates to bias the measurements, but I won't discuss this just now. Just to keep things simple, just consider that we have 8 qubits that are put in superposition, and then I measure them to get a code that is 8 bits long. So I run the hyperdice for a number of times, and then I get a stream of 8 bits, which are then further processed by the client to retrieve parameters for the sound synthesizers. There are two kinds of synthesizers. One is a very generic additive synthesizer, and the other is a waveguide synthesizer, which simulates the sound of a slide flute-like instrument. The measurements will also define which of the synthesizers will be played. Now, QSIC is more sophisticated than the previous in the sense that it learns to produce musical sequences based on what the musician plays. So it listens to a melody, extracts musical information, generates transition matrices, which are then converted into angles to rotate the qubits of a quantum circuit. And then the server receives those angles and builds quantum matrix circuits, generates sequences in binary representation, of course, and sends these sequences to the client. The client then receives those sequences, converts those binary representations into musical representations, and of course plays the musical response. Let's look at this in more detail. The client identifies musical notes played on the clarinet and extracts their pitches, loudness, and rhythms. These data are then compressed into 4 elements for each of those streams and builds 4x4 matrices for each of them. The transition matrices are then translated into parameters for quantum circuits. So that is, those parameters are angles for rotating qubits representing the transitions. This circuit was designed by Jim Weaver. So we have three matrices, therefore we have three versions of the same circuit stacked together. You can see here we need 6 qubits to encode 3 transition matrices. The quantum computer then runs the circuit for a number of times and generates sequences according to the transition probabilities. The system then uses those measurements to control a MIDI system that generates musical materials or responses to the clarinet sounds. In this example, we input this short musical passage to the system, which I believe most of you will recognize. And this is the response generated by QSIC. We ask the system to generate 20 notes. The musical score that I wrote for Zeno contains instructions for the performer and indicates what to expect from the quantum computer. I had to invent my own musical notation here. In addition to notated musical phrases to be played on the bass clarinet, there are moments where the performer is asked to improvise with a given set of musical notes. It is those improvisations that are listened to and processed by the system. For instance, here is an example where the performer is asked to improvise with a given set of 7 notes for at least 5 seconds. At this point, the system is programmed to enter in listening mode for 5 seconds, as indicated here by the box labeled #5 QC listening. The listen improvisation is then processed, the client and the performer do their jobs, as I explained earlier, and a response is produced. In this case, the response is synthesized by the additive synthesizer. The duration of the response is not known, because this will depend on the number of notes that the performer improvised. As soon as the response starts, the performer selects one of 2 sets of notes to improvise along with the system's response. Let's have a look at this. Let me introduce you to an interesting concept which inspired me to compose this piece the way I did it. A clarinet is a monophonic instrument, right? That is, it plays one note at a time. However, very skilled players are able to produce multiphonics on a clarinet. That is, more than one note at once. This is achieved by blowing air through the device in such a way that the resulting spectrum is split around more than one prominent fundamental frequency. This gives the auditory impression that two notes are being played at the same time. This method often allows for two types of multiphonic variants with the same fingering position on the keys of the clarinet. But what is interesting here is that it's often the case that performers cannot predict accurately which of the two sets will result. For example, in this slide here, given a bass note B2, the same fingering position shown on the left side produces either an additional A5, shown at the top of the stave, or a slightly sharped D4, shown at the bottom of the stave. Whereas this unstable nature of such multiphonics are often taken as an inconvenience, they actually come in handy for what I wanted to do in this piece, which I refer to a quantum-compliant musical scenario. Let us consider a scenario where the performer encounters an instruction to produce multiphonics using a specific fingering position. Metaphorically, what I am suggesting here is that the act of following this instruction is somewhat analogous to measuring a quantum system. The performer is not certain which multiphonics will be produced until she actually plays the instrument. Even if the performer steers her efforts towards producing one of these two options, this would only increase the probability of obtaining it because it is still uncertain. In other words, the multiphonics for a specific fingering position are unknown until a performer observes it. Let's have a look at how I explored this idea compositionally. On this slide, I instructed the performer to play multiphonics using a fingering position which is shown on the left side of the figure there. The two possible multiphonics are shown as well within brackets on the first chord there on the left side. After a brief moment of uncertainty, indicated by the wavy line, the multiphonics settle into one or the other, indicated with the lowercase letters A or B. Then, depending on the resulting multiphonics, the performer is instructed to select notes from two sets, A or B, capital A or capital B. And these are notes that the performer will improvise with for at least 15 seconds. Note that the selection of the set, A or B, depends on the result of the multiphonics. Then, as in the previous example, the system listens to this improvisation and produces a response and so on. In this case, it uses the waveguide synthesizer, which simulates a sliding flute. Let's listen to this. Here is an example of using the quantum sequencer. In this case, the system listens to an improvisation, then it analyzes the notes, builds the transition matrices, etc., as explained earlier, and generates a response using the MIDI system. Okay, so now let's follow some sessions of the score to see how the composition is put together.